guys, it's Tough Cheetah and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be doing something I have been working on for a few months now. And it is part 1 of ranking all 27 MCU movies. And yes, 27. I've been working on this since before Doctor Strange came out, so only 27. This series will be 4 parts. It'll be this one, which is the movies that I don't like that much or I think are boring. Part 2, which is movies I like. Part 3 is movies that I love. And part 4 is top 5, basically. So the best MCU movies in my opinion. I want to use this platform and say good and bad things about everything. No movie is truly perfect, and honestly I think we should stop thinking that. I also will not talk about drama with actors or actresses, because that's none of my business, and I just would rather talk about the movie instead of the people in the movie. Unless they are great actors that I wish to acknowledge. For their acting, not for their people skills. Anyways, I just want to get right into it because this will be a long video, probably. So, let's start with number 27. A movie that should come in as no surprise to anyone, we have The Incredible Hulk, 2008. My favorite part of this movie is when Tony Stark shows up at the end, and I wish I was lying, but I am not. I had almost no notes for this movie, and I can barely even tell you what happened. I found myself dozing off or even just staring at the screen blankly as I tried to understand the plot. Most of the movie felt like filler scenes, but every single scene was a filler. I came in expecting a Hulk origin story, which is cool because the Hulk is such a weird and interesting character, but no, this isn't an origin. They just throw you right in with zero context, hoping that you read the comics. I wanted those gritty details, but I will give it the benefit of a doubt for a moment and discuss what I thought was done well with this movie. There was a really cool chase scene in the beginning. I always love those, and I'm a fan of all chases, especially car chases, but this was like a parkour extravaganza, and it was cool. And in that same scene, they had a classic dummy in the bed trick. I fell for it, so it's a win in my book. The Hulk and the Abomination had both a good design and pretty good CGI for the time, and their fight scene was incredibly entertaining. No pun intended. Oh boy. Plus, we get a good old Hulk smash moment. I really like Ed Norton's acting, and I totally understand why he left this role. He deserved better than this, not going to lie. Elizabeth and Bruce had a pretty cute romance that I can get behind, and Hulk protecting his lady was a pretty nice scene. Jumping from building to building as the Hulk was satisfying to watch. So basically, the best part of The Incredible Hulk was the Hulk, or Tony's small cameo. The majority of this movie was overly dramatic and somehow still uninteresting. The blood scene towards the beginning of the movie was a super weird experience, especially without context. An old girlfriend of Bruce has a new man now, and we're supposed to care, even though we basically were just introduced to these two characters. And the body horror of the Hulk and Abomination. Yikes. That's, yeah. Don't look directly at the screen. And of course we have General Ross, which I can't really say anything bad about him because R.I.P. William hurt. But I've never liked Ross as a character, and I feel like he's meant to be unlikable? I don't know. But maybe this movie was just meant for the comic book people. I personally don't have much interest in the Hulk as a character. So maybe those of you who do will like this movie. And I just don't get it because I don't understand the character at all. That's fine. For me personally, however, there is a gap between 26 and 27, and it is not small. I have no plans on rewatching The Incredible Hulk, but I don't know, maybe some of you can change my mind? We'll see. At number 26, we have Iron Man 2, 2010. This movie gave us Natasha Romanoff and Tony in a racing suit and hoodie. That's about it. As a movie with multiple antagonists, I sure don't remember a thing about them except for I want my bird, and Justin Hammer disrespecting women. This movie would honestly be better with no villains at all, given the way that Tony acts throughout the entirety of it. Especially during his birthday party, which is one of the hardest scenes for me to sit through in the entirety of all these movies I'm going to be talking about. He's dying and doesn't know what to do, so he scares everybody away. Tony's even harder to like in this movie than he was in his first movie, and that's technically when he's at his worst. All of the fights with the villains start and end immediately. And oh wow, an Iron Man villain with an Iron Man-like suit. I've never seen that before. First Iron Man movie. Everyone knows this, and it's been a problem about this movie since newer ones came out, but Black Widow's over-sexualization? Whiplash was extremely underwhelming, yet somehow Justin Hammer is even worse, and that is a feat, my friend. But this movie isn't 100% bad, and this movie has some shiny moments that deserve credit, so I am here to offer it. Black Widow is the biggest highlight of this movie. Beyond the sexualization, she's got the moves, is not afraid to talk back to the famed genius billionaire playboy philanthropist. Tony even admits that she's good at what she does, being a triple imposter and all. Scarlett Johansson was a great casting choice, and I will forever thank Marvel for casting her because, yes, Tony was Howard's greatest creation.
What is and always will be My greatest creation is you.
How can you not like that line? Aesthetically, this movie has a few things going for it. Tony's holograms are always very cool to look at, and his new arc reactor is probably my favorite design. Whiplash, despite being forgettable, his whips are really cool looking. And the suitcase suit-up on the raceway is one of my favorites of all of the Iron Man suit-ups. I'm not 100% sure this is true, but I heard that the little boy wearing the Iron Man mask is actually Peter Parker in the MCU, and if that is true, that is awesome, or shall I say amazing. Besides the obvious problem of Tony pushing away everyone he cares about, there are a few heartfelt moments, such as when Tony and Natasha talk about the last party they'd ever have. Rhodey and Tony talking in the garage, and then later they have their team up, Nick Fury and his murder daughter. And of course
It's you. It's always been you.
between Tony and Pepper. For a movie that lacks structure and heavily leans on Tony's billionaire playboy aspect, there are some memorable and sweet moments that strengthen both old relationships and develop new ones. I really wanted to like this movie. Iron Man 2 is famously known to be the weakest installment in the MCU, and I was prepared to prove people wrong. But no, I barely stayed engaged, and even when I was, it was either because I was angry or because Natasha was on screen. Iron Man 2 is kind of a mess. This movie is firmly placed at number 26 with very little wiggle room. It started at the bottom and it remained at the bottom. Coming in at number 25, we have Thor 2011. This movie makes Thor like Tony Stark, but somehow less enduring. Thor is extremely reckless, selfish, and has anger issues that rival the Hulk's. Being Thor's movie, having the main character be the absolute worst for the majority of it is a bold move. Not only that, but the love interest is super uninteresting and basically falls for Thor because science! Who's even the villain here? Is it Loki? Laufey? Thor's reckless spontaneity? Odin? Odin is legitimately the worst father and lies through his teeth every chance he gets, along with contradicting himself constantly. I strongly dislike Odin, but do not undermine Anthony Hopkins' performance because it's Anthony Hopkins. This is not a super memorable movie, with the exception of a few one-liners such as another.
This drink, I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
Or Darcy mispronouncing Mjolnir really badly.
Mia? What's Mia?
There were a few moments of poor CGI and makeup, such as the look of Laufey most of the time looked very strange. And Fandral being impaled did not look very realistic at all. But who knows, maybe we can chalk this up to being 2011? But on a more positive note, Loki was easily the best thing to come out of this movie. Tom Hiddleston's excellent acting was immediately captivating the moment he was on screen. One of the only true references to Frost Giant Loki, Tom Hiddleston's revealing scene with Anthony Hopkins was amazing and solidified himself as an MCU great.
Tell me!
Plus, Loki's relationship with Thor is one of the more interesting and developed relationships.
I will not fight you, brother! I'm not your brother. I never was.
In this movie being the beginning of it, it deserves the credit. Heimdall, Frigga, and Darcy, and Hawkeye's small moment of glory, were really fun side characters that were introduced in this movie. And that line, magic is just science we don't understand yet, it's a very underrated and amazing line that should be acknowledged because wow, that is such a beautiful way to put it. Thor's journey to become worthy, in general, is a cool way to introduce the character. The execution was a bit rough, but the ending when he powers up and reclaims Mjolnir, is that how you pronounce it? Was an awesome moment and a great sort of ending scene. I guess there's more that followed, but let's just pretend it ends with that. And while we're on the subject, the visual effects are fantastic, especially for the time that it came out. Asgard is beautiful, as is the Rainbow Bridge and space in general. As a lover of astronomy and science fiction, I find this to be a satisfying example of the universe they were trying to show us. And as a last addition to this, I will also say that Odin casting out Thor was a both visually pleasing and powerful moment, probably one of the best in the movie. All things said and done, this being one of the first entrances into the MCU, I have to get it credit where it's due. But out of the origin movies, with the exception of The Incredible Hulk, I do find this to be the weakest. Although it introduces the famed God of Thunder and his even more famous brother Loki, this movie is pretty forgettable and is mostly just there to set up the Avengers. I'm glad this movie exists, but it's not a movie that I like going back and rewatching. And moving on, barely ahead of its predecessor, we have Thor: The Dark World 2013. I'm gonna be honest here and say I could easily switch the first two Thor movies around in this ranking and feel completely indifferent about both choices. There were characters in this movie that were worse and are more annoying than they were in the first movie, such as Jane being even more boring despite being basically the main conflict, Odin still being the dad of the year, and now we have Eric, who went crazy after the Avengers and now just makes me highly uncomfortable. But Loki and Thor were more enjoyable, and being the main characters, that made it barely squeak ahead of the first Thor movie. But before I continue with the positives, I do have to touch on the negatives that aren't simply carryovers from the first film. Malekith and the Dark Elves not only look bad, but they're also one of the most forgettable villains of the MCU. They might as well not exist at all, because they definitely did not make an impact or even have a good climax. They were beaten very easily and quickly. There were plenty of scenes that existed just to try and be funny. They were either plain unnecessary or they lasted too long. They gave an intern to have a love interest that lasted about 3 seconds. And if you know, you know, Seabass. Seabass, 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 Seabass. Given how funny Thor Ragnarok was, we know it's not just that Thor movies shouldn't try and be funny, it's that this one wasn't executed properly. But Darcy was pretty funny sometimes, so I guess not all of it was bad.
I want to throw something. Jane, give me your shoe.
I've already mentioned Odin, but gotta say that Odin telling Loki that his birthright was to die solidified him as one of the worst MCU parents, so hats off to you, sir. Now, when looking at my notes for what I liked about this movie, half of it was just me loving Loki. So as part of my argument for why this is better than the first Thor movie, I'm just going to put in a little Loki montage.
Oh, this is much better. Whoa. Costume's a bit much. So tight. Ta-da! I didn't do it for him. Now they're firing at us.
Yeah, thank you for the commentary, Loki. It's not at all distracting.
That was for New York.
I like her. Oh dear. Is she dead? Trust my rage. No, don't hit it. Just press it gently. No. Thank you.
Thor and Loki's complicated relationship carried this movie, and both Chris and Tom brought forth some amazing banter that made Loki's sacrifice mean that much more.
I thought you liked tricks.
And even though that sacrifice didn't last long, Loki as Odin did prompt Thor to give him one of his best lines.
I'd rather be a good man than a great king.
Frigga was an absolute delight, and getting to see her show off her illusions that she taught Loki was awesome. And in the end, she went out in an Asgardian-style Viking funeral, which was both meaningful and a beautiful send-off to Loki's mother. Plus, Loki's reaction to finding out about her death will never not break me. The costume design was great, maybe even one of the best parts of this movie. Thor looked so good, not going to lie, and Heimdall and Loki's armor was just really sleek and nice looking. There's just something about it. Really, all of the Asgardians have cool outfits. Whoever the costume designer was, shout out to you. The first two Thor movies did not age very well, and I think we can thank Thor Ragnarok for that. I don't want to say that the villains make a movie, but with the villain this disappointing, it's hard to ignore. As beautiful as Asgard is, and as great as the acting is, this movie fell flat in the end. Not a bad movie, but a boring one. Now, to get away from the Thor movies, we have at number 23, Captain Marvel 2019. It's funny how things change. First time I watched this movie, I really enjoyed it, thinking that all of the crap this movie was getting was totally unnecessary, which it was, but that does not change the fact that every time I watch this movie it gets more boring. And I'm not blaming Brie Larson for this because I think she did a pretty good job with it. It's just a strange movie that ruined previous mysteries from other movies and caused even more mysteries and unnecessary theorizing, like Tony Stark is actually a Skrull? It just wasn't fun, man. It kind of ruined the experience. But because of the amount of flack this movie got, and I feel bad for it in the end, I will be talking about what I liked first this time, before we continue with the less than stellar plot decisions. Carol Danvers as Carol Danvers and not Captain Marvel, for reasons I will explain later, was really enjoyable. She's a dork with plenty of quips.
Oh, hey guys. Arm wrestle for the Tesseract.
Who does not know how to human, but in the end always gets back up and has a very sweet relationship with her best friend and said best friend's daughter. On top of that, we get to see the famed relationship between Nick Fury and Danvers, and even got the origins of the Avengers Initiative. Carol's relationships on Earth ended in a very bittersweet way, but they didn't stop me from enjoying what we got with seeing Aunt Carol having no memories and still having a connection with the people of her past. Plus, come on, said it for Monica Rambeau. Am I just complimenting Carol for having cool friends? Okay. Good stuff about Danvers. Carol's line,
You have no idea who I am. I don't even know who I am.
followed up with,
My name is Carol.
hits pretty well. The aspect of Danvers having missing and or altered memories leaves something for you during your rewatches, such as the flashbacks changing from her having blue blood and seeing a scroll come up to her, but in reality her blood was red and it was actually young Rob coming up out of the shadows. And of course this all culminates into a super fun battle in space, with a No Doubt song playing in the background.
Don't make me do this.
Okay.
And not ending in a do-over fight with Jan Rog was a respectable move. She didn't need to prove to him that she can win in a fight without her powers. She was done with him and that part ended as it should. And here we have the first part in this series where we have a middle ground section. CGI was either really good or really bad and confusing. Young Nick and Coulson looked pretty good, but some of the scroll designs were horrible and that led to some horrific transformations and some very unnatural looking moments. Carol's powers are neat to look at and that led to some fun and entertaining sequences. But what the heck was that mouth throw with the Supreme Intelligence? How did that come up in the boardroom? I generally like Talos and got a little emotional when he reunited with his family. But in general, I don't like what the Skrulls added to this universe. Plus the twist being that the Skrulls weren't really the villain, but actually they were the Kree, didn't add very much. Just a big whoop-de-doo, the villains are now even more boring, and then they got absolutely wrecked, so they didn't even last very long. And now, here's the fun part. Captain Marvel is too overpowered. When a character's only flaw is being too good at what they do, we have a problem. The best way for a character to seem relatable is for them to have noticeable flaws, but Carol doesn't seem to have any. Ronan lasted about 2 seconds, ignoring the fact that this is a prequel, so why would you even bother? I like Carol Danvers, but Captain Marvel needs to show off some weakness because that's just good character design. I had to get up and walk around for a bit while rewatching this. Thank goodness for Disney Plus, not a sponsor, because I had to pause and come back about half an hour later in order to pay attention. You don't need to have ADHD to be antsy watching this, because there just simply isn't enough to keep you in your seats. Captain Marvel isn't a bad movie in a traditional sense. It simply tries too hard in some areas and not hard enough in others. With twist villains, a 2-second villain, and an overpowered protagonist, you get Captain Marvel. But the cast was really good, so I hope that the Marvels lands a little bit better than the first one. Ranked number 22, we have Avengers Age of Ultron 2015. I wish I could say this movie grew on me, but this has been towards the bottom of my list since it first came out. And it had so much potential too. Awesome! The Maximoff twins. Wanda is so awesome and powerful and has a very intriguing backstory, and Pietro is already dead, in 2 bullets of all things. His super speed, especially now that we have Makari in the MCU, does not look that great with the exception of this scene here. Yay, Natasha is back. I love her, she's so cool, and she's been reduced to a love interest and to Bruce Banner of all people. The flirting was very uncomfortable, and maybe don't imply that a woman is a monster because she got an involuntary hysterectomy. Maybe they were trying to say she's a monster because she's a brainwashed killer. But context is everything and you should be more careful with your words regardless, because that should never have been an issue. Plus she has the most ineffective Black Widow suit I have ever seen. I mean, like, are you seeing this? It's glowing bright blue. Okay, positive time, because this is still an Avengers movie, and of course there are some good moments. This film is very quotable and has plenty of funny dialogue. There are so many lines in this movie that I will quote unapologetically and without warning.
Language.
You get killed, walk it off.
Somebody want to deal with that bunker? Thank you.
But if you put the hammer in an elevator, it would still go up. Elevator's not worthy. Please be a secret door. Please be a secret door. Please be a secret door. Yay. Go to sleep. Go to sleep. Go to sleep.
Don't take from my pile.
Steve doesn't like that kind of talk.
You know what, Romanoff?
You'll never.
Never what? You didn't finish!
But if you step out that door, you are an Avenger.
You didn't see that coming?
But a thing isn't beautiful because it lasts.
I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to take this time to explain my evil plan.
And for gosh sake, watch your language.
The action is very Avengers, but the opening sequence, including Cap's motorcycle throw, because Yes. The addition of Wanda because, duh. Thor's hammer hitting Cap's shield with all that lightning goodness. Hulkbuster versus Hulk and that team up in the church. This movie executes plenty of classic Marvel action that is overall enjoyable and satisfying to watch. And Wanda's induced nightmares? Bringing forth Tony's PTSD and Cap, the man who never returned from war trope? Barton's little farm life is adorable and Auntie Nat? How can you not like that? Although this movie gets a bad rap because it feels like it was just a setup movie for future movies, because it kind of was, it did set up the new Avengers, and I will not complain about that. And I saved this for the end because I knew it would be an unpopular opinion, but I love Ultron. Of all the villains I'm going to be talking about today, he's my favorite one. I've done my research, and the argument I see against him the most is that he wasn't intimidating or scary enough, but,
What doesn't kill you just makes me stronger.
This guy was in my nightmares for years. I watched this for the first time as a young teenager and it scared the crap out of me. But he isn't simply a villain, he's a misguided artificial intelligence that isn't technically wrong. And James Spader is the voice, come on, it's great. I am a fan of Ultron and his freaky Pinocchio references.
I had strings, but now I'm free.
And on that note, let's return to why this movie is so low on my list after all of that good stuff. There was so much happening. So much, and yet nothing at all. It's like a movie with too much filler, but also too much plot that there simply wasn't enough time for. But there was enough time for Thor to go hang out in some hot springs because, yeah, there's definitely time for that. This is not a movie I like sitting through on an annual basis because of how dark and dreary it is. Yes, I know this is the MCU we're talking about, and there are a lot of stakes. But this movie in particular just really unnerves me, and it always has. The other major turnoff about this movie is simply how much the Avengers argue with each other, especially Tony and Cap. Now this will likely keep coming up throughout because it is a hot topic, but I do not enjoy movies where the heroes of the movie just don't even seem to like each other. Cap and Tony clash so much that eventually I got tired of hearing stuff from stick-up-his-butts Rogers and knows-everything Stark. Age of Ultron has grown on me since the first time I watched because back in the day, this was at the bottom of my list. With a great ensemble and what I thought was a pretty good villain, there was a lot of potential that eventually fell flat because of poor execution and a whole lot of filler. Ranked number 21, we have Eternals. 2021. Eternals is an interesting addition to the MCU. The movie with the lowest critics' Rotten Tomato score of the universe. I do not have high expectations coming into this, although I do try and not let critic score affect my personal opinions. While I certainly disagree with this being the worst addition to the MCU, the risk of introducing all new characters that most of us casual movie fans will not understand was a risk that did not pay off. There is way too much happening and not enough explanation. Aesthetically, this movie is off the charts, with amazing costume design, cinematography, and visual effects that rival Doctor Strange. The main characters were a bit wishy-washy, resulting in me liking only about half of their characterizations. Athena and Gilgamesh had an amazingly sweet relationship that ended in tragedy and managed to invoke something in me, while Cersei and white-bread Icarus' relationship was just straight up bad. And who in their right mind would even like Icarus? Sprite. But to bring it back to the positive, Druig and Makari's relationship was adorable, and the deaf representation was much appreciated. The only time you hear Makari make any sort of noise is when she thinks that Icarus just killed Druig, and that is how you do it. Plus Makari's super speed looks epic, and definitely captivating compared to some other aspects. All of the unique powers and fight sequences were kind of awesome. Athena and Makari were particularly the ones that stood out to me, but really every character's ability was interesting and looked good too. Sprite's illusions? Awesome. And get them all together in one scene, such as Everyone vs. Icarus, you get a captivating and unique team-up that even the stuffiest of fans will have to admit looked good. Icarus, the man who flew too close to the sun, literally dying that way at the end of the movie? Okay, as a nerd, I can appreciate this. The last main thing I enjoyed about this movie was that it gave an interesting look at human history and how the Eternals influenced or didn't influence our time on Earth. It was just neat. The Eternals essentially acting as guardians and then being set free led to some interesting what-ifs. I liked seeing that, but I will admit the constant time skipping at first was hard to follow. The biggest problem with this movie is that it tried to fit too much information into an objectively small amount of time. Yes, it is a long movie, but not long enough to explain away thousands of years. There simply wasn't enough time to care about the characters or the betrayal from Superman himself, Icarus. The Celestials were incredibly boring, and I don't remember much about the deviants except for Athena killing one because, yes. As big features of this movie, they were disappointing, but they did still look good. And as a last point, Ajax died too quickly. Just that. Too fast. Eternals as a Marvel movie just does not live up to its other entrances. If this wasn't a Marvel movie, I would say, yeah, it's a pretty good movie. The cast for the most part was outstanding, and this movie totally got gypped in not receiving a Best Visual Effects nomination. But because it is an MCU film, it just doesn't work. I definitely don't think you should skip this film, as it is worth a watch, but this isn't going into my rewatch list. Also, Harry Styles shows up at the end, so if you really want to just see Harry Styles, you could just skip to the end. And with only 2 movies left in this video, we have at number 20, Ant-Man 2015. I remember liking this a lot more a few years ago, but maybe it has to do with the fact this was one of my first MCU movies. Looking back at it now, it's pretty average. Not bad, I'm definitely not saying that, but it's not all that special. It's incredibly slow, and half the movie is just people talking in different locations quietly, and a lot of the action is just done in montages. But Paul Rudd was absolutely made for this role, and I love Scott. An ex-convict trying to get his life together because he wants a relationship with his daughter also has mad skills as a criminal. Scott is underratedly smart and by far the best part of this movie, which I would hope so because it is his movie. Going subatomic, something that you were told you will never be able to come back from, just to save your daughter you barely have a relationship with? Come on. I will always have a soft spot for broken families healing in one way or another, and this movie has several of those. The strained relationship between Hank and his daughter Hope was introduced early on in the film, and over the course of the movie they come to better understand each other, and eventually, the first time you ever hear Hope call him Dad is when he gets shot. Then, as I said, we have Scott, who's going through some things, but still really cares for his daughter. And while we're on it, Cassie is a great little actress. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but I love her. Luis, do I need to say more about him or just insert this?
So, he tells me that she's working as a housekeeper now, right?
This is a heist movie through and through, and I really like the added aspect of the shrinking and growing, especially the fights. The suitcase fight and the fight in Cassie's bedroom were super innovative. And Scott's training montage was cool because when else are you going to get to see someone jump through a keyhole? I actually really like Scott and Hope's relationship. She teaches him how to fight, and he tries to help her with her relationship problems. It's adorable. And on that note, perfect transition, Hope was a lot less likable than I remember her being. Her playing both sides was definitely a factor, and I get that it was partially a ruse, but it certainly did not add to my enjoyment and was overall unpleasant. Also, finding out that Evangeline Lilly's hair in this film is not a wig. She must have some beef with that hairdresser because, oh my gosh, what did you do to Evangeline Lilly? As cool as the Yellow Jacket suit was, the villain was uninteresting and largely forgettable. I felt nothing for him and did not feel that he had a good enough backstory. As much as I am not a stickler for comic book accuracy, I feel that the Darren Cross in the comics was a better story to go with rather than salty protege. Ant-Man is in no way a bad movie. I actually really like it. It's just compared to everything else. This is a funny movie with a good cast, and if I wanted to just put on a movie in the background, I might just pick this one. But plot-wise, it's basic, and it stands out in the MCU as a funny yet mildly irrelevant MCU entrance, and has a very boring villain. And not for the first time, we have a sequel that is barely better than its predecessor, although in this case, I do think there's a bigger gap between this one than in Thor and Dark World. Ant-Man and the Wasp 2018. A movie with a lot of build-up and not a lot of doing. I had such a hard time paying attention to the messy plot that I forgot that the ultimate point was to find Janet Van Dyne. But if you ignore the fact that Janet should not have aged like that in the quantum realm, there are plenty of sweet family moments, and the quantum realm itself is a neat setting. But that is not the part that stood out to me. Ghost is probably the best part of this movie, with some of the sickest effects and action sequences as a result of her. She is the main reason I like this one more. Ava herself is a slightly different story, because even though she does have a sad story and a right to live, her willingness to sacrifice Janet to get her way was messed up. But Hannah John came and made up for it in the end, with her crooked smile and soft voice that was somehow very intimidating.
I don't think they can hear you.
And ultimately, she was one of the better villains I've talked about today. Showing the aftermath of Civil War was very important, and more movies in this series should acknowledge the consequences of previous editions. A lot of positive marks I have for this movie were the same as they were for Ant-Man, so I'm just going to do this part really quick. Hope and Scott are still adorable, and it follows the super skilled girl and her idiot boyfriend, and I love it. Paul Rudd continues to impress as Scott, and somehow Janet? Switching into an entirely different person is hard to do. And Rudd totally did what he came to do. World's greatest grandma, Paul Rudd, everybody. Like its predecessor, Ant-Man and the Wasp totally brings the humor and is good for a laugh now and again.
Hiya, champ. How was school today?
family dynamics are still great, with Scott having a good relationship with his daughter, ex-wife, and somehow his ex-wife's partner. Hope and Hank have a better relationship that only gets strengthened with the determination to bring back Janet. The shrinking and growing fights only got better with the addition of Wasp and her wings. That knife scene? Yes, 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 everything yes. And of course that Hot Wheels car chase. I like car chase sequences regardless, but with the addition of tiny cars and giant Pez machines, it certainly adds some extra spice. This is more of a side point, not completely relevant to plot, but there's a moment that I just really appreciate, and that is Luis loving Wasp. Not because she's hot, but because she's cool. Now that's how you write men, people. And now for the negatives beyond the pacing. I hate the Sonny Birch side plot. He did not need to be there, and he only made the plot messier and more complicated than it already was. Bill's double standardness and his constant childish squabbles with Hank Pym got old fast. Oh yeah, I'm totally willing to sacrifice this person, but not that person. Hey Hank, remember that wife that you lost? Yeah. No. Do not like Bill. And there isn't actually that much that I don't like about this movie. It's completely fine and that's about it. The cast is as good as ever, and now the villain has a more interesting backstory and a better power. And yeah, it's an average film and I feel perfectly fine with its placement. And there we have it. There's part 1 of ranking all 27 MCU films. I had a lot of fun making this. I love editing stuff like this. I have no idea when the other parts will be coming out because I still have scripting to do, but they will come out, regardless of how good or not good this video does. I hope if you've made it this far, you've enjoyed it. I worked really hard on this, and this is just really fun. Next time, I'll be talking more about films that I actually like. Not that I didn't like the last few films, I actually did. It's just that there's so many good ones, it's hard to have a bottom of the list. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!